Now, I'll draw your attention to the place below the linear Yosher Partzufim of Olam HaAtzilut. And as we already mentioned, this is the area where the bottom three worlds, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiah, would later on be created. And as you can clearly see in the illustration before you, this entire area is situated beneath the linear Yosher aspect of Olam HaAtzilut. However, as we see in the blue protrusion in front of us, the bottom part of Adam Kadmon's linear Yosher aspect does actually reach the area where these bottom three worlds will later on be situated. And just to make sure that none of us forgot how we got to this stage, I'll remind us that in the previous sessions, the author began by telling us that both aspects of the 12 Partzufim of Adam Kadmon, which we see here in the color blue, as well as of Olam HaAtzilut, that we see here in the color red, all of them were formed by the Kav, or more specifically, by the light of the Ein Sof that flows inside the Halal via that Kav. Based on that, the author now continues to inform us that the circular and the linear aspects of the bottom three worlds, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiah, were also formed by the Kav. And in order to properly demonstrate to you the various details that make up these three bottom worlds, we'll have to significantly enlarge our picture and focus upon this relatively tiny area situated below the linear Yosher aspect of Olam HaAtzilut. But before we actually zoom into that place and examine its contents, in order to help our eyes become accustomed to the positioning of this relatively small place in comparison to the rest of the worlds, I intentionally colored this relatively small area in the color green, as what resembles a box of sorts within the giant halal that already contains the first two worlds, Adam Kadmon and Olam HaAtzilut. But we'll need this green box only in the beginning, in order to serve as a point of reference of sorts to compare the bottom three worlds with Adam Kadmon and Olam HaAtzilut. However, now we'll proceed to, so to speak, enter our green box and begin to examine the various details that make up these bottom three worlds. And the very first thing that we see there is the very bottom of the linear aspect of Adam Kadmon, as we see in the color blue. And although we can't actually see it, nevertheless, inside the linear aspect of Adam Kadmon is the Kav, from which all the Partzufim of the bottom three worlds were formed. The first and the greatest of the three bottom worlds to be created is called Olam HaBeriyah, depicted here in a light blue color. And the first element of Olam HaBeriyah to be formed is a circular Igul aspect of Atik Dechura, followed by its linear Yosher aspect as well, as you can see in our illustration how the new linear Yosher aspect of Olam HaBeriyah in the light blue envelops the linear Yosher aspect of Adam Kadmon in the darker blue color. And notice how Olam HaBeriyah doesn't actually take up the entire area below Olam HaAtzilut, but only the uppermost area. In doing so, Olam HaBeriyah left room for the two lower worlds that will later on be formed underneath it, namely Olam HaYetzirah and Olam HaAsiah. And before long, we'll certainly speak in much greater depth about how these three bottom worlds relate to each other in their positioning. But before we do just that, let us first introduce the parts that make up these three worlds. After the two aspects of Atik Dechura, the next partzuf of Olam HaBeriyah to be formed is the circular Igul aspect of Nukvei de Atik, seen here in the color white, followed by its linear Yosher aspect as well. Next in line came the circular Igul aspect of Arich Dechura in the light blue color, followed by its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. And then came the circular Igul aspect of Nukvei De'arich, seen in the color white, followed by its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. Next in line came the Partzuf known as Abba, in the light blue color. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. After that came Partzuf Ima, in the color white. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. After Partzuf Ima came the Partzuf known as Yisrael Saba, in the light blue color. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. The next Partzuf to come along is called Tevuna, seen here in the color white. First came its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. After that came Ze'er Anpin, in the light blue color. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. Next in line came the Partzuf known as Le'ah, seen here in the color white. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. After that came Yaakov, in the light blue color. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. And the last of all the Partzufim in Olam Beriyah is called Rachel, seen here in the color white. Its circular Igul aspect, and its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. And now that we've enumerated and illustrated the circular and the linear aspects of the 12 Partzufim that make up Olam Beriyah, we'll continue by examining the general structure of the bottom three worlds. And first, we'll illustrate how both the circular and the linear aspects of the 12 Partzufim of Olam HaYetzirah were also formed by the light of Rachamim that flows inside the Kav. And although we do not actually see the Kav in our current illustration, that is because the linear aspect of Adan Kadmon in the dark blue color envelops the Kav all the way down to its end, which, as we learned earlier, is at the very center of the Halal. This is the reason why we don't actually see the Kav. However, here in Olam HaYetzirah, I chose to shorten things out a bit, and therefore I did not bother to enumerate the order in which all the different circular and linear aspects of its 12 Partzufim came along into the scene. Instead, I illustrated only a general picture of Olam HaYetzirah, hoping to give us a general understanding of the positioning of Olam HaYetzirah in comparison to Olam Beriyah. And of course, as we see towards the bottom of our illustration, eventually came along the lowest of the three bottom worlds as well, known as Olam HaAsiah. And here too, I did not bother to detail the order in which all the parts of Olam HaAsiah were formed from the light of Rachamim at the bottom of the Kav. My main intention, though, was to impress upon you the general positioning of Olam HaAsiah in comparison to Olam HaYetzirah and Olam Beriyah. And as we see, Olam HaAsiah is situated at the very bottom of this area, parallel to the very end of the Kav. And at this point, I have to admit to you that in truth it is very, very difficult to accurately illustrate the exact structure of any particular spiritual world with respect to the Tzimtzum, as well as with respect to all the other spiritual worlds. Why am I telling you all of this now? Because I cannot deny that amongst the vast Kabbalistic literature we find several opinions with different two-dimensional illustrations to what we've been illustrating here. But you should know that everything I've illustrated for you so far was based on extended discussions and meticulous clarifications with my mentor, Rav Ve-Yosher Harbani. And as we delve together into the depths of this particular discussion, i.e. into how the bottom three worlds are positioned one compared to the other, Rav Shaharbani Shalita pointed out to me all the difficulties that he had with the two-dimensional illustrations that the other Kabbalists adopted. And instead, he instructed me to illustrate the following three-dimensional hierarchy of the three bottom worlds. But in order to understand the picture before us, you should know that in the writings of the Arizal, we find that the four main worlds, i.e. Atzilut, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiah, are organized in what the Arizal calls a four-story building alignment, or alternatively, as four apples sitting one on top of another, so to speak. And when we pay careful attention to the finer details as well, my Rav points out that in the famous book Torat Chacham, we find that both the circular Igulim and the linear Yosher aspect of these four worlds are aligned one on top of the other, like four apples that sit one on top of the other, so to speak. Therefore, based upon all of the above, I proceeded to illustrate the positioning of the worlds in the exact fashion that you see before you. But I must mention that even this illustration is only according to the simple understanding of the Arizal's words. As in truth, according to the deeper understanding of the Arizal, which is not spelled out in his writings, things do change to some extent. And accordingly, the picture that we should be seeing in the eye of our mind will also change. However, generally speaking, my intention in all of these illustrations and lessons is to present to you primarily the simple understanding of the Arizal's teachings, even at the expense of intentionally overlooking some of the finer nuances that the Kabbalists have derived from the Arizal's teachings. Therefore, we'll cautiously avoid the deep waters of the Arizal for the meantime. And God willing, we'll continue to learn and advance much more together till one day we too are able to appreciate the deeper understanding that the Arizal alluded to but did not want to spell out for reasons that only he knew why. But now that we've illustrated and clarified a picture of both the circular and the linear aspects of all the different worlds, beginning with Adan Kadmon and all the way down to Olam HaAsiyah, I took the time and effort to impress upon you by means of a very detailed and innovative illustration just how small our physical world really is in comparison to the rest of the worlds that the Ein Sof created within the Halal. And in order to impress all that upon my viewers, I'll begin by clarifying that all the physical matter that exists in all the worlds that were created inside the Halal is to be found only in Olam HaAsiyah, which we know is certainly the bottommost world inside the Halal. But to be even more specific, we should clarify that actually the physical matter is found only in the physical side of Olam HaAsiyah, because even Olam HaAsiyah has a spiritual dimension devoid of any physical matter, where we find the angels of Olam HaAsiyah who are usually called Ofanim. And although the spiritual side of Olam HaAsiyah is certainly beyond mankind's sensory cognition, nevertheless, the physical side of Olam HaAsiyah is indeed recognizable to man. Not only its linear Yosher aspect, but also its circular Igulim. And although human beings relate primarily to the linear Yosher aspect of the worlds, since after all man is built in a linear, erect fashion, as the verse in Kohelet calls man Adam Yashar, literally straight man, nevertheless, when it comes to the physical side of Olam HaAsiyah, man is actually able to relate to the circular Igulim of that world as well, in spite of our linear physical nature. What are the circular Igulim of Olam HaAsiyah? Rav Chaim Vital points out in his book Sha'arei Kedusha that the Igulim of Olam HaAsiyah are actually the circular or elliptical orbits of the physical planets that physical man can actually see with his naked eye. That is to say, if he has some background in astronomy. And I want all of you to know and take to heart that the millions of physical stars and planets in all the numerous galaxies in the universe are found only in the physical part of Olam HaAsiyah, which, as we know, is the smallest world in existence. But since a picture is worth 1,000 words, I therefore took the effort to help impress this particular point upon you with a very detailed illustrated map of the physical side of Olam HaAsiyah. And before we get into the specifics, let us first be impressed with the beauty of the Almighty's masterful creation with the help of some very general pictures of Olam HaAsiyah that I collected courtesy of NASA. Ma rabu ma'asecha Hashem. What you currently see before you is a very general picture of our solar system. And of course, that's our planet Earth. But from this point on, we'll continue on our tour around Olam HaAsiyah in a much more organized fashion, from the reference point of our planet Earth. And as we stated earlier, the goal of our tour is to impress upon you just how small and seemingly insignificant our planet Earth is compared to the entire Olam HaAsiyah. And after we do just that, then ever the more so will we be able to appreciate just how small and seemingly insignificant our planet Earth is compared to all the other worlds that the Ein Sof created inside the Halal. Well, already in stage 1 of our journey, we can begin to appreciate just how small our planet Earth is compared to its own solar system. And you should know that on the spiritual level, planet Earth is indeed the center of the universe, around which all the planets and even the sun orbit around. Nevertheless, even the Torah world does not deny that on a physical level, the Earth does indeed orbit around the sun. And that's the approach we'll be adopting throughout our current illustration, despite the fact that on a spiritual level, as we mentioned, planet Earth is indeed the center of the universe. The same way that Yerushalayim and the Beit HaMikdash are the center of the world. In stage 2 of our journey, we see just how small our entire solar system is compared to its neighborhood. And there is no secret that the scientists say that our sun is actually no more than an average star compared to the other stellar objects in the universe. And now we can appreciate why. In stage 3 of our journey, we see how even our solar system's entire neighborhood is actually no more than a tiny speck compared to the rest of our galaxy, the famous Milky Way. And in stage 4 of our journey, we see how even our entire Milky Way galaxy is actually just one single galaxy in a neighborhood of many other similar galaxies. In stage 5 of our journey, we take to heart how even our entire neighborhood of galaxies is actually a single neighborhood in a sea of other neighborhoods of galaxies, what you would call clusters. And in stage 6 of our journey, we see that even that huge sea of clusters of galaxies is actually no more than a drop in the greater ocean of superclusters of galaxies. And in the last stage of our journey, we come to appreciate that even the great sea of clusters of galaxies that we just saw is actually but one small area in the entire universe that is known to the scientists today, thanks to the telescopes and all the other means with which modern-day scientists are able to map out the physical universe. And after seeing all of that, we should certainly be able to appreciate just how large the entire physical universe is compared to our tiny planet Earth. And having returned from our journey, we must again reiterate that everything that we just saw was a depiction of only the physical side of Olam HaAsiah, which of course is the smallest of all the worlds, even smaller than Olam Yetzirah and Olam Beriyah. And where exactly are these three bottom worlds situated? We see how these three bottom worlds are, so to speak, contained in their own green bubble, which is actually situated below the linear Ve-Yosher aspect of Olam HaAtzilut. And now let us take to heart how much larger and greater Olam HaAtzilut is compared to the three bottom worlds, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiah. Additionally, let us also take to heart how much larger and greater Adam Kadmon in the color blue is compared to Olam HaAtzilut in the color red. And it is almost needless to say how much larger and greater Adam Kadmon is compared to the bottom three worlds, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiah. Finally, we should stop and take to heart that in truth, all of the different worlds that we've been illustrating along our way are merely a tiny drop in the great infinite sea of light, which is the Ein Sof. And now we should probably go back and clarify what I promised to eventually return to way back in the beginning of our learning. If you remember, the author taught us earlier that when the Creator decided to create the worlds, he then restricted or constricted his infinite light in the very center of his existence. In other words, that Tzimtzum occurred in the very center of the Ein Sof. And if you remember, already at that time, I jumped and asked the obvious following questions. What could the Arizal possibly mean? How could there be a center point to the Ein Sof? Since the infinite Creator, by definition, has no beginning point and no end point, which after all is why the Kabbalists refer to the Creator as the Ein Sof, literally no end, therefore he cannot possibly have a center point. After all, how could we go about measuring the center point of an entity which has no beginning and no end? Think about it. Be as it may, in spite of all these difficulties, it is still expected of us to understand what the Arizal must have meant with that controversial statement. But when I learned this particular topic with Rav Ve-Yosher Harbani Shelita, he immediately clarified that the Arizal certainly did not intend to suggest that the infinite Creator actually has a center point, God forbid. Instead, Rav Shaharbani clarified that in truth, when the Arizal spoke about the center point of the Creator, he was actually saying that the original Tzimtzum occurred in the spot which would eventually become the center of the halal, once the area of the tzimtzum would expand larger and larger, further and further away from that original point of tzimtzum, as we learned before, and as you currently see in the illustration before you. So why then did the Arizal refer to the center point of the halal as the center point of the Ein Sof? To appreciate this fine point, we need to take to heart that the center point of the halal is actually where the physical part of Olam Asiah is situated. And that's also where man lives, in the very center point of the halal, which we understand is also the furthermost point away from the Ein Sof, who resides outside of that halal. In short, this is what the Arizal really meant when he spoke of the center point of the Ein Sof. He was referring to the center point of the circular halal where physical man resides, which of course is as far as you can possibly get from the Ein Sof. But certainly it is a complete misnomer to speak of the actual center point of the infinite creator. Since he has no beginning and no end, then he certainly has no center point as well.